The morning sun in Arizona Territory has a particular quality to it. Our narrator observes, watching the telegraph operator of Copper Creek Station begin his day. It arrives not gently, as it might in Ohio, where our man spent his youth, but suddenly, like a furnace door swinging open. The operator, 34 years of age and 8 years removed from everything green and familiar, has learned to rise before it, in that blue hour when the desert still remembers the night's cold. His quarters sit above the station office, 4 rooms that smell perpetually of creosote and coal smoke from the trains that pass through twice daily. He dresses methodically. Cotton shirt, suspenders, the worn vest with a watch pocket that holds his father's timepiece. The watch runs 3 minutes fast, but he's never corrected it. Some inaccuracies, he's found, become their own form of precision. Downstairs, the telegraph key waits on its resonator box, that democratic instrument that makes all men equal in dots and dashes. 20 words per minute he can send, fingers dancing their electric ballet, though this morning starts slow. Weather reports first. Clear skies, Copper Creek, stop. Temperature 82 at dawn, stop. Wind northwest, 5 miles, stop. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe needs these reports, as do the copper mines 40 miles north, where men descend into the earth seeking fortune, or at least a steady wage. Our operator, let's observe him more closely, has hands that tell stories. The right index finger, slightly crooked from a break years ago, calluses from the key, yes, but also from the harmonica he plays in the evenings, a habit that annoys Station Master Bradshaw, but brings some comfort to the Mexican families living near the water tower. He sends the commodity prices next. Copper at 14 cents per pound, silver at 53 cents per ounce. Numbers that mean survival or departure for the 400 souls of Copper Creek. At 9:17, Maria Torres appears at the station door. The narrator notes how grief has aged her, only 26, but her husband's death last August has drawn lines around her eyes that the desert sun merely deepens. "Señor," she says, for she never uses his name, though they've known each other 2 years. She carries papers, legal documents from the Southern Pacific Railroad Company. "I cannot read this English," she admits, though the operator knows she reads it well enough. Pride, he understands, sometimes requires such small deceptions. He takes the papers, scanning the labyrinthine language of corporate liability and widow's compensation. Sam Torres, electrocuted while repairing lines during a monsoon storm, reduced to a number: $312.40, payable in installments. "It's less than they promised," he tells her carefully. She nods, unsurprised. Promises, in the territory, evaporate faster than morning dew. The noon train brings mail and newspapers 2 days old from Tucson. The operator sorts them while eating his lunch, cold beans and yesterday's bread from Ruby Chen's store. The Chinese woman always adds an extra biscuit, never acknowledged but understood. These small kindnesses, our narrator reflects, form the invisible telegraph of human decency. Cornelius Bradshaw emerges from his office at 2 o'clock, whiskey already on his breath. 52 years old, still wearing his cavalry insignia from the Indian Wars, he surveys his domain with the suspicious eye of a man who's learned that control is always illusion. "Any word from division?" he demands. The operator shakes his head. Bradshaw grunts, retreats. Since his son died of fever in Cuba, the station master sees threats in every shadow, omens in every cloud formation. The afternoon stretches like taffy. Our operator transcribes messages, mining equipment orders, personal telegrams, mother improved, stop, doctor optimistic, stop. Railroad scheduling changes. Between messages, he maintains the equipment, cleaning the relay contacts with his special brush, checking the batteries, 60 cells of copper and zinc that power this tentative connection to the greater world. Theodore Marsh arrives at 4, all 28 years of ambition, wrapped in a suit too fine for the desert. The assistant station master has the smooth manner of a man who's never doubted his destination, only his route. "Hot enough for you?" he says, the same joke every day. The operator smiles, plays along. Trust, he's learned, often begins with tolerating another man's poor humor. As evening approaches, the light turns golden, then orange, then red as blood. The operator climbs to the station's roof with his small telescope, a luxury purchased with 2 months' savings. Venus appears first, then Mars. He's mapping their movements, a private project that gives structure to the vastness. Below, the town settles into evening routines. Lamplight in windows, smoke from chimneys despite the heat, humans marking their presence against the indifferent desert. The narrator pauses here, considering this man who sends words he didn't write to people he'll never meet. There's something both powerful and powerless in the position, a perfect metaphor for the human condition. Connected, yet isolated, essential, yet replaceable. He embodies the fundamental paradox of modern life in the American West of 1904. At 10 o'clock, the operator makes his final rounds. He checks the lines, tests the circuits, logs the day's traffic in his careful hand. Tomorrow will bring more of the same: weather, prices, human hopes compressed into dots and dashes. But tonight, he plays his harmonica softly, a melody from Ohio that sounds different under Arizona stars. The desert listens without judgment, and somewhere, perhaps, another soul hears the music and feels less alone. 2:13 in the morning, and the telegraph key began its antic dance. Our operator, pulled from dreams of Ohio rain, stumbled downstairs in his nightshirt, feet finding the familiar path through darkness. The message coming through made no earthly sense. River runs upward, stop. Copper tastes of Sunday, stop. Mother's hands are cold, stop. S. Torres. The impossibility of that signature froze him mid-breath. Sam Torres had been dead 13 months, his body buried in the Catholic section of Copper Creek's cemetery, marked by a wooden cross that Maria refreshed with whitewash every month. The operator's practical mind immediately sought explanation. Someone's poor joke, perhaps, or a coding error. But his fingers, as they transcribed the message, trembled slightly. By 2:45, Bradshaw stood in the office, wild-eyed and barely dressed, having heard the clicking from his quarters. "What devil's work is this?" He snatched the transcription, read it 3 times, then crossed himself, a gesture the operator had never seen from the Presbyterian station master. The whiskey fumes couldn't mask the fear radiating from the older man. "It's a mistake," the operator offered, though the signature bothered him. Every telegrapher had their fist, their unique rhythm of sending, like handwriting in dots and dashes. This hadn't been Sam's fist, too irregular, too harsh, but someone had wanted them to think of Sam. Bradshaw wouldn't hear reason. "That boy died on the 19th of August, he said, as if the date itself held power. Electrical storm, just like tonight's atmospheric disturbance." There had been no storm, only the usual dry lightning that flickered over the mountains without bringing rain, but the operator didn't correct him. The next morning arrived heavy with unspoken tension. Our narrator observes how superstition spreads through a small community like typhoid through bad water. By noon, half of Copper Creek knew about the ghost message. Old Jake, the station's handyman and former prospector, spat tobacco juice and declared he'd always known Sam's spirit was restless. "Saw lights out by Skeleton Ridge last month," he claimed, though everyone knew Jake saw many things after his evening bottle. At 3:20, Dr. Edmund Carey appeared at the station, ostensibly checking on a medical supply shipment. 45 years old, with hands that shook until his second drink, the doctor had the careful dignity of a man managing his own dissolution. "Heard you had some excitement," he said, trying for casual interest but betraying genuine need. The operator recognized the signs: dilated pupils, perspiration despite the dry heat. The laudanum shipment was late again. "Just telegraph troubles," the operator replied, but Carey lingered, picking at his cuticles. "Sam Torres was my patient," the doctor said finally. "That night, the storm night. His body, when they brought it in—" He trailed off, lost in some medical memory that clearly haunted him. The operator poured water from the clay jug, offered it to the doctor. Sometimes, our narrator notes, kindness requires no words, only the acknowledgement of another's struggle. Carey drank, steadied himself, then shared an unexpected detail. His hands were burned, yes, but there was something else. The position of the body, the way the muscles had contracted. It suggested he'd been trying to send a message when the lightning struck. This information settled uneasily in the operator's mind as afternoon dissolved into evening. He found himself checking the death log he'd kept, a habit from his first year when the isolation had threatened to unmoor him entirely. August 19th, 1903. S. Torres, 28 years, electrocution, repair duty, survived by wife Maria, unborn child. The child had been born in December, a son Maria named Samuel, who'd lived exactly 4 days. Marsh appeared at 6, unusually solicitous, heard about the strange message, must be unsettling. He helped himself to coffee from the pot, added sugar with the liberal hand of a man who'd never known scarcity. Bradshaw's taking it hard. Man's been fragile since Cuba. The calculation in Marsh's sympathy was subtle but present, like a banker evaluating collateral. That evening, the operator climbed to his observation post on the roof, earlier than usual. The stars, at least, remained constant, following their paths without regard for human confusion. Through his telescope, he tracked Jupiter's moons, those distant dancers Galileo had first seen 3 centuries ago. There was comfort in celestial mechanics, in movements that could be predicted, calculated, trusted. But at 2:13, precisely the same time, the key began its stuttering song again. This time, coal car burns backward, stop. Time tastes of iron, stop. The baby never cried, stop. S. Torres. The reference to the baby chilled him more than anything supernatural could. Few outside Maria's immediate circle knew about the infant's brief life. The operator transcribed mechanically, his mind racing through possibilities. Someone with knowledge of the Torres family tragedy was orchestrating this performance. But why? Bradshaw arrived faster this time, as if he'd been waiting. His face had the gray pallor of a man wrestling with fears that whiskey couldn't drown. "It's him," he whispered. "Sam's trying to tell us something. About the accident, about—" He stopped, grabbed the operator's arm with surprising strength. "You didn't know him well, but Sam Torres was a good man. If his spirit's restless, there's reason." The operator extracted himself carefully from Bradshaw's grip. In his experience, the living caused far more trouble than the dead. But as he watched his superior stumble back to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that these messages, whoever sent them, were designed for a specific purpose. Someone wanted Bradshaw unbalanced, frightened, perhaps even removed from his position. The narrator invites us to consider the peculiar cruelty of using a dead man's name to torment the living. In the isolation of Copper Creek, where every soul depended on every other for survival, such psychological warfare seemed particularly vicious. Our operator, trained to transmit messages without judgment, found himself forced into the role of detective, not by choice, but by circumstance. The telegraph never lied, he'd always believed, but someone was making it speak falsehoods, and that violation of trust disturbed him more than any ghost story could. 3 nights of ghost messages had transformed Copper Creek Station into a place of whispers and sideways glances. Our operator found himself studying faces at Ruby Chen's store, searching for signs of complicity or knowledge. The Chinese woman, 32 and sharp as a telegraph spike, noticed his scrutiny. "You look for something you hope not to find," she observed, wrapping his purchases in brown paper with her efficient hands. The messages had grown more specific, more disturbing. "Lightning speaks Spanish, stop. The cross burns without flame, stop. Tell Maria the pain ended, stop. S. Torres." Each arrived at 2:13 precisely, that cursed hour when the boundary between night and morning blurred. The operator had begun staying downstairs, fully dressed, waiting with a mixture of dread and curiosity that he recognized as the detective's curse, the need to know overriding the desire for peace. Bradshaw's deterioration accelerated like a locomotive on a downgrade. The operator found him that Tuesday morning slumped over his desk, an empty whiskey bottle standing sentinel beside a loaded Colt revolver. "He's trying to drive me mad," Bradshaw muttered, not lifting his head. "Sam knows what I did." "What did you do?" the operator asked carefully, but Bradshaw only laughed, a sound like grinding gears. Searching for understanding, our man ventured into the station's records room, a dusty chamber where years of logbooks and correspondence molded in the dry heat. Sam Torres's employment file was thin. Hired April 1901, promoted to senior lineman June 1903. Deceased August 19th of the same year. But tucked behind the official papers, the operator discovered something unexpected: Sam's personal journal, apparently recovered from his quarters after his death and forgotten. The handwriting was cramped, foreign-educated, but struggling with English idioms. Our narrator observes how immigration transforms not just location, but language itself, creating hybrid voices that belong fully to neither world. Sam wrote about his pride in mastering the telegraph, his love for Maria, his dreams of bringing his brothers from Sonora. But the entries from his final weeks revealed growing concern about safety violations, about pressure from Bradshaw to repair lines during dangerous conditions, about corners cut to save the company money. The August 18th entry, his last, read, "Bradshaw insists I go out tomorrow despite the storm warnings. Says Division will have his job if the line stayed down. Told Maria not to worry. Must trust that God protects those who have no choice." Theodore Marsh materialized in the doorway as the operator closed the journal. "Fascinating reading?" The assistant station master's smile had too many teeth, like a coyote's grin. "Poor Sam. Bradshaw never forgave himself, you know. The old man ordered him out in that storm, then tried to call him back when the lightning started. Too late. Why wasn't this in the official report?" Marsh shrugged, a gesture so casual it seemed rehearsed. Bad for morale, bad for the company, bad for everyone. Some truths serve no purpose. He paused, then added with studied carelessness, "Bradshaw's been unstable for months. These ghost messages might be the excuse Division needs to pension him off." The calculation in that statement struck the operator like a physical blow. He'd considered Marsh a friend, or at least an ally in the daily tedium of station life. They'd shared coffee and complaints, discussed books and baseball scores from back east. But ambition, our narrator reflects, makes strangers of the most familiar faces. That afternoon, Maria Torres arrived with legal documents requiring translation. But her real purpose became clear when she asked, "The messages that come at night, do they truly claim to be from Samuel?" The operator weighed his words like gold dust. "Someone signs his name." She nodded slowly, her face unreadable. "My husband believed in justice, even after death, perhaps especially after death." She gathered her papers, then turned back. "Senor Marsh came to my house yesterday. He wishes to buy it. Says I would be happier elsewhere. Says the memories here are too painful." "What did you tell him?" "That pain is sometimes all we have left of love." The philosophical weight of that statement lingered as evening approached. The operator made his rounds, checking equipment, logging routine messages. Dr. Carey appeared at sunset, slightly steadier than recent days. "My shipment arrived," he said, patting his vest pocket. "Amazing how medicine clarifies thought." He studied the operator with eyes that had seen too much of human frailty. "You know, I performed the autopsy on Sam Torres. At Bradshaw's insistence, actually. He wanted to be certain it was the lightning, not equipment failure. The burns were consistent with electrocution, but there was one oddity." The operator waited, understanding that confession has its own rhythm, like Morse code. "Sam's right hand," Carey continued, "showed defensive wounds, old scars, well-healed, but also fresh scratches, as if he'd been in a struggle recently. I didn't include it in my report, seemed irrelevant to the cause of death. But now, with these messages—" He shrugged, a gesture that encompassed the vast uncertainty of human knowledge. That night's message arrived with mechanical precision at 2:13. "The helper becomes the master, stop. The wire remembers everything, stop. Justice wears a false face, stop. S. Torres." Bradshaw didn't come down. The operator found him later, passed out in his quarters, the empty revolver on the floor. He'd fired 6 shots into the wall, creating a pattern that looked almost like Morse code. Dash, 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 dot, 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 dash, dash, dash. SOS, repeated twice. a call for help that no one had answered. The narrator invites us to consider how grief and guilt interweave like telegraph wires, carrying messages we never intended to send. The operator cleaned the revolver, loaded it, placed it back in Bradshaw's desk drawer. Some kindnesses, he understood, consisted of maintaining another's dignity in their dissolution. But as he transcribed that night's message into the official log, he made his decision. The ghost of Sam Torres, whether real or manufactured, demanded investigation. The living owed at least that much to the dead. Old Jake found him at dawn, checking the equipment with unusual thoroughness. "You're hunting something," the handyman observed, his rheumy eyes sharper than most gave him credit for. "Seen that look before, in men following gold that might not exist." "Sometimes the search matters more than the finding," the operator replied. Jake spat his eternal tobacco juice, nodded. "Sometimes. But sometimes what you find changes everything you thought you knew. Happened to me out by Skeleton Ridge back in '93. Found silver, sure enough. Also found out my partner had been planning to kill me for it." He walked away, then called back. "Seen Marsh out that way recently. Man says he's checking lines, but there ain't no lines that far out. Just old wire from the Butterfield stage route, rusted to hell and good for nothing but keeping cattle where they belong." The decision to trace the telegraph lines came with Thursday's dawn, when the operator realized that answers lay not in the station's clicking keys, but in the silent desert beyond. He packed water, hardtack, his tools, and most importantly, his testing equipment, a galvanometer that could detect the faintest electrical currents. Bradshaw, still drunk from the previous night's terror, waved him away with barely focused eyes. "Check whatever needs checking," he slurred. "Nothing matters if the dead won't stay quiet." The lines ran northwest from Copper Creek, following the railroad tracks for 3 miles before diverging toward the mining settlements. Our operator walked beside them, noting where posts had weathered, where insulators had cracked, where the patient desert had begun its slow reclamation. The sun climbed mercilessly, and he thought of Sam Torres making this same journey 13 months ago, never to return. 5 miles out, near Skeleton Ridge, that geological curiosity that did indeed resemble a massive rib cage exposed to sky, the lines began their troublesome sag. Here, the original survey had cut corners, spacing posts too far apart to save money and time. The wires drooped like a washerwoman's clothesline, and below them, almost touching in places, ran the remnants of old fence from the Haversham Ranch, abandoned since the drought of '97. The narrator observes how the desert preserves everything and nothing simultaneously. The ranch's adobe walls had melted back into earth, but the barbed wire remained, rusted to the color of dried blood, strung between posts of ironwood that would outlast empires. Where the telegraph wire nearly kissed this ancient fence, the operator stopped, knelt, examined. The galvanometer confirmed his suspicion. During atmospheric disturbances, those dry lightning storms that plagued late summer, the fence would become charged, creating electrical fields that could indeed induce current in the telegraph lines above. The effect would be random, chaotic, creating signals that the receiving equipment might interpret as dots and dashes. Nature herself could send messages, it seemed, speaking in a language that mimicked human communication without meaning. But signatures? Those required human intervention. "Finding what you're looking for?" The voice startled him. Old Jake stood 20 yards away, his burro loaded with prospecting gear. The old man moved through the desert like smoke, appearing and disappearing according to his own mysterious purposes. "Maybe," the operator replied, showing Jake the test results. The handyman studied them with surprising comprehension. "Used to work the lines myself back in Kansas," he revealed, "before gold fever brought me west." He pointed toward a cluster of rocks. "That's where I've been seeing Marsh 3-4 times this month. Always around sunset, always alone." Together they investigated, finding evidence of recent activity, boot prints, the distinctive stub of Marsh's Turkish cigarettes, and most tellingly, a coil of copper wire hidden beneath a flat stone. New wire, bright and untarnished, the kind used for temporary connections. "Man could splice into the lines here," Jake mused, "send whatever messages he pleased back to the station. Would take knowledge, though, and purpose." He fixed the operator with a meaningful look. "Question is, what does a man do with such knowledge?" The return journey felt longer, burdened as it was with confirmation of human malice. Our narrator reflects on the peculiar disappointment of solving a mystery, how the supernatural, however frightening, sometimes seems preferable to the calculated cruelty of our fellow beings. The operator reached the station as shadows lengthened, finding chaos. Dr. Carrie was attempting to calm a hysterical Bradshaw, while Marsh stood aside, observing with poorly concealed satisfaction. "He tried to tear out the telegraph equipment," Carrie explained. "Said he wouldn't let Sam speak through it anymore." "Perhaps a leave of absence," Marsh suggested smoothly. "For his health." The operator met Marsh's eyes, saw the calculation there, the certainty of victory approaching. But he said nothing. Not yet. Evidence gathered in haste could be explained away, and Marsh had connections the operator lacked. Instead, he helped Carrie guide Bradshaw to his quarters, where the doctor administered a sedative. "He's destroying himself," Carrie said quietly, preparing another dose. "The guilt, the whiskey, now these messages. A man can only bear so much." The doctor's hands, steady now with his medicine restored, showed the competence that had once made him sought after in larger towns. "You know, I've been thinking about Sam's death." "The timing of it. What about it?" "August 19th. The day before, Bradshaw had received notice that Division was sending an inspector. Sam's accident postponed that visit indefinitely. Death has a way of rearranging priorities." That evening, Maria Torres brought soup to the station, her kindness toward Bradshaw touching despite his role in her husband's death. "He is suffering," she said simply when the operator expressed surprise. "Samuel would not want more suffering." She stayed while he ate, speaking of her husband's love for the telegraph, how he'd practiced at home with a practice key, teaching her basic code. He said electricity was like thought itself, invisible but powerful, connecting distant minds. She paused, then added, "Senor Marsh asked again about buying my house. He says Bradshaw will be leaving soon. The changes are coming." The operator considered telling her about his discoveries, but held back. Trust, once broken, required careful reconstruction, like repairing a damaged wire. Instead, he asked, "Do you still have Sam's practice key?" "Of course. It sits on his desk, where he left it." That night, at 2:13, another message arrived. "The truth hangs between earth and sky. Stop. The guilty hand guides the innocent key. Stop. Ask the widow about the helper. Stop. S. Torres. But this time the operator noticed something crucial. The sending style had changed, become smoother, more confident. Whoever was sending these messages was getting better with practice. He thought of Marsh out by Skeleton Ridge with his hidden wire, carefully rehearsing his deception, perfecting Sam Torres's signature. The narrator invites us to consider the hollow victory of discovering human villainy. Our operator sat in the darkness after transcribing the message, understanding that knowledge without power to act upon it constitutes its own form of torment. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert, their voices carrying truths that required no translation, no interpretation, no technology to bridge the darkness. Friday brought a gift from the desert, a dry electrical storm that would arrive by evening, according to the morning weather reports from Tucson. Our operator saw opportunity in this atmospheric disturbance, a chance to test his theory with scientific precision. He prepared his equipment methodically: the galvanometer, copper wiring, rubber gloves that had cost a week's wages, and most importantly, a detailed logbook to record every observation. Marsh appeared at noon, unusually interested in the operator's activities. Preparing for the storm? Admirable dedication. He lingered by the equipment table, fingers tracing the galvanometer's brass casing. You know, I've been reading about electrical phenomena. Fascinating how nature can mimic human communication. Almost as if the universe itself wishes to speak. The calculation in his casualness was obvious now that the operator knew what to look for. Every word seemed chosen to probe, to discover how much was known, how much suspected. Our narrator observes that knowledge changes perception irrevocably. Once you've seen the magician's trick, the magic dissolves into mere mechanics. Just routine maintenance, the operator replied, but Marsh's smile suggested he wasn't fooled. Dr. Carey arrived at 3, checking on Bradshaw but also drawn by curiosity about the evening's experiment. I studied electrical medicine in Baltimore, he revealed, his voice carrying a note of nostalgia for the man he'd been before laudanum claimed him. The human nervous system is itself electrical. Perhaps that's why we're so susceptible to atmospheric disturbances. The operator invited him to observe the experiment, recognizing a potential ally in the doctor's scientific mind. Carey accepted, adding, "I'll bring my medical instruments. Different perspectives might prove valuable." As afternoon waned, old Jake appeared with unexpected news. "Found something you should see," he said, producing a water-stained notebook from his saddlebag. "Was out by the old Haversham place, looking for copper ore in the tailings. Found this in what's left of the main house." The notebook contained surveyor's notes from 1897, when the telegraph lines were first installed. The original plan had routed them 2 miles south, avoiding Skeleton Ridge entirely. But someone had changed the route, saving the company $400 in wire and posts. The signature on the change order was familiar: C. Bradshaw, then a junior supervisor eager to prove his worth. "He's always known about the sagging lines," Jake said. "Known and did nothing." The storm began building at 6, massive thunderheads piling up against the mountains like purple-black cotton. The operator positioned himself at the key, with Carey beside him and Jake stationed at the window to observe the lightning. The first atmospheric disturbances began at 6:43. Random clicks and stutters as electricity danced through the air. The operator documented everything. the interval between lightning and signal, the pattern of natural interference versus intentional messages. The desert's electrical voice was chaotic, yes, but distinctly different from human transmission. Nature spoke in bursts and clusters, while human operators maintained rhythm, even when trying to appear random. At 8:17, during a particularly intense lightning display, both phenomena occurred simultaneously. The natural interference created a background static, but through it, clear as a bell tower, came structured message. The storm remembers, stop. The earth drinks truth, stop. S. Torres. Impossible, Carrie breathed. You can't send through that level of interference. But the operator had noticed something else. The message had arrived 2 minutes after a lightning strike, enough time for someone monitoring the storm to splice in their transmission. He showed Carrie the timing log, watched understanding dawn in the doctor's eyes. Someone's using the storm as cover, Carrie said. Brilliant, actually. Diabolical, but brilliant. They continued monitoring until 10, documenting 3 more ghost messages, each arriving during lulls in the natural interference. The pattern was unmistakable. Human intelligence exploiting natural phenomena, creating a supernatural effect through entirely material means. Bradshaw stumbled into the office at 10:30, drawn by the clicking. His appearance shocked even Carrie. 5 days of constant drinking had transformed him into a walking ghost, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling. "Is he speaking?" he asked desperately. "Is Sam forgiving me?" The operator faced an ethical dilemma. The truth might destroy what little sanity Bradshaw retained, but allowing the deception to continue seemed equally cruel. Before he could decide, Marsh appeared, rain-soaked despite the storm's lack of actual precipitation. "Checking the lines," he explained, though no one had asked. "This electrical activity could damage equipment." His boots, the operator noticed, carried the distinctive red clay found only near Skeleton Ridge. The narrator invites us to observe this tableau. 4 men in a small office, each carrying their own version of truth, while outside the desert raged with primordial electricity. The storm, indifferent to human drama, continued its ancient dance, but inside the station, a very human storm was building. "I've made a decision," Bradshaw announced suddenly, his voice achieving a moment of clarity. "I'm requesting transfer, or retirement." "I can't continue here. Not with Sam's ghost demanding justice." Marsh's satisfaction was barely concealed. "Perhaps that's wise. The company values your service, of course. I'm sure they'll arrange something appropriate." But Maria Torres, who had arrived unnoticed through the back entrance, spoke from the doorway. "My husband would not want you to leave in shame, Senor Bradshaw. He understood that men sometimes face impossible choices." Her presence changed the room's dynamics entirely. The operator watched Marsh's face cycle through calculations, trying to determine how much she knew, how much threat she posed. But Maria's dignity was unassailable, her grief a shield against manipulation. "I found something of Samuel's," she continued, producing the practiced telegraph key from beneath her shawl. "Perhaps it would help to understand his final message." She set it on the desk, its brass gleaming in the lamplight. "He was practicing something the night before he died." Over and over, the same pattern. She tapped it out slowly. Dash, dot, dash, dot. Dash, dash, dash. Dash, dash, dot. Dash, dot, 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 dot. Dot, COMEHER. Come her. An incomplete message, the final E missing. He was warning someone, Carrie said quietly, or asking for help. The storm peaked at midnight, one final massive discharge that illuminated the desert like noon. In that moment of revelation, the operator understood that Sam Torres had indeed left a message, but not from beyond the grave. His widow, his practice key, and his incomplete warning were all parts of a truth that someone very much wanted buried. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that follows electrical storms, as if the desert had been washed clean of deception. Our operator, having spent the night analyzing his notes, understood that the natural phenomenon of electrical interference was merely the foundation upon which someone had built an elaborate fraud. But knowing and proving were different animals entirely, as separate as lightning and thunder. He found Marsh already in the office at 6, unusually early, sorting through telegraph traffic with focused intensity. "Quite a storm last night," Marsh offered without looking up. "I trust your experiments were illuminating?" The question carried weight, like a telegraph pole tested for rot. "Educational," the operator replied, matching his neutral tone. He noticed Marsh had a fresh scratch on his left hand, the kind barbed wire might leave on someone working in darkness and haste. The morning brought unexpected news from Division. An inspector would arrive Monday to evaluate the station's operations. Bradshaw received the telegram with resigned acceptance, his week-long descent into the bottle having stripped away any pretense of resistance. "Let them come," he said, voice hollow. "Let them see what their demands have wrought." But the operator detected something else in Marsh's reaction, not satisfaction but concern, quickly masked. An inspector meant scrutiny, questions, examination of records that might reveal more than ghost messages. Dr. Carey appeared at 10, ostensibly to check Bradshaw's condition, but actually to share a revelation. "I couldn't sleep after last night's demonstration," he said, accepting coffee with hands that barely trembled. "So I reviewed my medical notes from Sam's death. There's something I overlooked, or perhaps deliberately ignored." He paused, gathering courage. "The burn pattern on Sam's hands wasn't consistent with grabbing a live wire. It suggested he was holding something metal when the electricity struck. Something small, cylindrical. Like a telegraph key or a splice connector. The kind used for field repairs. Our narrator observes how truth emerges not in grand revelations, but in small details, accumulating like desert sand until they form dunes that can't be ignored. The operator considered this new information while watching Marsh through the window, saw him talking animatedly with two men from the mining company, their conversation punctuated by gestures toward the station. Maria Torres arrived at noon with disturbing news. "Men came to my house this morning," she said, "from the Pacific Railroad Bank in Tucson. They say Samuel had debts, that they have claim on my property." Her composure cracked slightly. "But Samuel never borrowed money. He saved every penny, sent half to his brothers in Sonora." The operator examined the documents she'd brought. The loan papers appeared genuine, dated 3 weeks before Sam's death, bearing his signature. But something bothered him. The signature was too perfect, too consistent with official documents on file. Real signatures varied slightly. These were identical, as if traced. "Senora Torres," he asked carefully, "did Sam ever mention working on a special project for Mr. Marsh?" Her eyes sharpened. "Once, about a month before he died. Marsh wanted him to run a private wire off the books. Samuel refused, said it violated company policy. They argued. The pieces were forming a picture the operator didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Marsh hadn't just wanted Bradshaw's position. He'd been building something larger, a network of private communications for the mining companies, selling privileged information about ore prices and land claims. Sam Torres had discovered this scheme and threatened its exposure. Old Jake burst in at 2, more agitated than the operator had ever seen him. "You need to come to Skeleton Ridge, now! Bring witnesses!" They went. The operator, Carrie, even Bradshaw roused from his stupor by Jake's urgency. Maria Torres insisted on joining them, her presence lending gravity to the expedition. What they found at the ridge defied immediate comprehension. Marsh had built an entire secondary telegraph station, hidden in a natural cave formation. Professional equipment, batteries, hundreds of feet of copper wires spliced into the main lines. A logbook showed transmissions dating back 6 months, commodity prices sent to select buyers before official release, private messages between mining executives, information worth thousands to those who received it early. "This is what Sam found," Jake said. "This is why he had to die." The narrator invites us to consider the corruption of communication itself, how the democratic promise of the telegraph, equal access to information, had been subverted for private gain. Bradshaw stood among the equipment, his fog lifting as understanding dawned. "The inspection," he said slowly. "Sam threatened to report this to the inspector. That's why I received the warning about unsafe conditions. Why I was pressured to send him out in the storm." His voice broke. "They used me to murder him." But it was Maria who found the most damning evidence, a practice tape in Morse code where Marsh had been perfecting Sam's sending style, his distinctive fist. Hour after hour of practice, learning to imitate a dead man's rhythm. "He couldn't let you retire peacefully," the operator told Bradshaw. "You might have discovered this during the transition. He needed you discredited, driven out in disgrace." They documented everything methodically, photographs Carrie had brought for medical purposes repurposed for evidence, measurements and notes in the operator's precise hand. But as they worked, the operator noticed something troubling. Fresh footprints in the cave, a still warm coffee cup. Marsh had been here recently, perhaps even this morning. The trip back to the station carried the weight of approaching confrontation. The sun was setting, painting Copper Creek in shades of copper and blood. The operator knew that Marsh would realize his scheme had been discovered. Desperate men, he'd learned in his years of transmitting human hopes and fears, were capable of anything. At the station, they found Marsh's quarters empty, his personal effects gone. But the telegraph key was clicking, a message coming through from Tucson. "Theodore Marsh, appointment confirmed, stop. New position, Yuma Division, stop. Effective immediately, stop." He'd already arranged his escape, his promotion, his clean exit from the scene of his crimes. The operator felt rage rise in him, unusual for his cautious nature. But sometimes, our narrator reflects, justice requires more than observation and documentation. Sometimes it demands action. The operator spent Sunday morning crafting a web of calculated falsehoods, each one designed to reveal truth through its passage. He sent 3 different messages about the discovery at Skeleton Ridge. One to Division Headquarters, stating the equipment had been destroyed by lightning. Another to the Tucson office, claiming it remained operational. And a third to the mining consortium, reporting its imminent discovery by inspectors. Then, he waited, knowing that Marsh, even in flight, would be monitoring the wires. Our narrator observes that deception in service of justice carries its own moral weight, like copper wire conducting electricity, neutral in itself, but capable of illumination or destruction, depending on its application. The operator had learned this telegraph principle. Every transmission creates an echo, and those echoes can be traced. By noon, the trap had sprung. A message arrived from Wickenburg, sent by Marsh himself. Skeleton Ridge equipment must be relocated before inspection. Stop. Will arrive tonight. Stop. Prepare everything. Stop. He'd revealed his position and his intention, unable to abandon the machinery that represented months of illegal profit. Bradshaw, sober for the first time in a week, studied the message with the tactical mind that had once made him a cavalry officer. "He'll come after midnight," he predicted, "when the last train is passed and the town sleeps." The transformation in the station master was remarkable. Purpose had returned to his movements, clarity to his eyes. Dr. Carey volunteered to help, his medical bag now containing chloroform alongside his laudanum. "For medicinal purposes," he said with dry humor. "Sometimes the best medicine is unconsciousness." The operator appreciated the doctor's newfound steadiness, how crisis could sometimes cure what comfort couldn't. They prepared throughout the afternoon, but subtly, maintaining normal station operations. The operators sent routine messages, logged weather reports, all while documenting every detail of Marsh's scheme in a comprehensive report for the inspector. His fingers, dancing across the familiar keys, felt like they were finally sending truth after weeks of transmitting lies. Maria Torres arrived at 4 with unexpected allies, 5 men from the Mexican community, all friends of her late husband. "Samuel helped them send money home," she explained. "They remember." The quiet anger in these men's faces suggested that justice might take forms the law didn't always recognize. "No violence," the operator insisted, though he understood their impulse. "The telegraph itself will convict him." He revealed his final discovery. By analyzing the sending patterns of hundreds of messages, he'd identified Marsh's distinctive fist, hidden in the ghost messages. Every telegrapher's rhythm was unique, the pressure, timing, and spacing as individual as handwriting. Marsh had perfectly imitated Sam's style for the signatures, but couldn't maintain it throughout entire messages. The evidence was mathematical, undeniable. "You mean the telegraph can identify who sent what?" Bradshaw asked, fascinated despite everything. "Always. The telegraph never lies, only the people using it." Old Jake stationed himself on the ridge with a mirror for signaling, while the others took positions around the station. The operator remained at his key, sending normal evening traffic to maintain the illusion of routine. At 11:14, a message from Marsh. "Delayed stop, arrive 3 a.m., stop. Keep station clear, stop." The arrogance of it, our narrator notes, still giving orders, still assuming obedience. But hubris, like electricity, always seeks ground. At 2:50, they heard horses approaching. The operator continued working, sending a weather report to Phoenix with deliberate normalcy. Marsh entered through the back door, carrying a carpet bag and wearing clothes more suited to fleeing than office work. "Working late?" Marsh asked, his hand resting on what the operator recognized as a concealed pistol. "Inspector arrives tomorrow. Lots to prepare." Marsh relaxed slightly, moving toward the equipment storage. "I need to collect some personal items. Company property I've been evaluating. The secondary transmission equipment from Skeleton Ridge." The words hung in the air like static before a lightning strike. Marsh's hand moved toward his weapon, but stopped as Bradshaw emerged from the shadows, his old cavalry Colt drawn and steady. "The game's over, Theodore," Bradshaw said, his voice carrying the authority of recovered dignity. "We know everything." Sam's murder, the illegal transmissions, the forged debts against Maria. Marsh's composure cracked like drought-stressed adobe. "Murder? Sam's death was an accident. I only wanted him away from the ridge that day. The storm—" He stopped, realizing his confession. "The storm you knew was coming," the operator said, producing the weather telegrams Marsh had received but never logged. "You got the warnings 12 hours early through your private wire. You knew exactly what you were sending Sam into." The Mexican men entered then, surrounding Marsh with silent purpose, but it was Maria Torres who delivered the final blow. She produced Sam's practice key and began tapping out a message, MURDERER. The sound broke something in Marsh. He collapsed into a chair, all ambition drained away. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he whispered. "Just a scare, to keep him quiet. The money from the mining companies, it was so easy." "Information is currency, don't you see?" The operator documented the confession, while Carey administered a mild sedative to keep Marsh calm until the sheriff arrived from Tucson. As dawn approached, painting the desert in pastels, they had everything: evidence, confession, and witnesses. But justice, our narrator observes, is never as clean as electricity through copper wire. It carries resistance, generates heat, sometimes fails to complete its circuit. The inspector arrived on the morning train to find the station in upheaval, the truth laid bare like exposed wiring. The subsequent investigation revealed that Marsh's corruption extended throughout the territory, involving dozens of company officials and mining executives. Some faced consequences, others disappeared into the vastness of the West. Marsh himself would serve 7 years in Yuma Territorial Prison, his refined manner poorly suited to breaking rocks under the desert sun. Monday's inspection became something entirely different from what Division had planned. Inspector Harrison, a thin man with the persistent look of someone who'd spent 30 years untangling lies from truth, arrived expecting to evaluate a failing station. Instead, he found himself documenting what he would later call the most elaborate wire fraud in Southern Pacific history. The operator watched Harrison work, appreciating his methodical approach. The inspector treated each piece of evidence like a telegram itself, recording not just the message, but the time, the sender's fist, the route it traveled. "You understand," Harrison said that afternoon, "this goes beyond one man's greed. This corruption has roots and branches throughout the territory." Our narrator observes how institutional corruption spreads like crack damage in a telegraph pole. Invisible at first, then suddenly the whole structure splinters. The operator had sent his morning weather report as always, maintaining routine even as federal marshals arrived from Phoenix to take custody of Marsh. But Tuesday brought an actual storm, one of those violent summer tempests that transform the desert into a temporary sea. Lightning struck the station directly, sending blue fire dancing across the telegraph keys. For a moment, the operator thought of Sam Torres, dying in such a storm, betrayed by those he'd trusted. The real damage came not from nature but from man. Wednesday morning, the operator found his quarters ransacked, his astronomy notebooks scattered and torn. Someone had been looking for something, perhaps additional evidence, perhaps something to use against him. The message was clear. Marsh had friends who didn't appreciate exposure. Bradshaw, surprisingly, rose to the occasion. "You're under my protection," he declared, strapping on his cavalry pistol. "I failed Sam Torres." "I won't fail again." The old soldier had emerged from his whiskey fog with a clarity that seemed almost miraculous, though Carey warned it might not last. "Guilt can motivate," the doctor observed, "but it's a fuel that burns out quickly." Thursday brought a revelation that shifted everything. Old Jake, prospecting near the abandoned Haversham Ranch, discovered something that had nothing to do with gold or silver. Hidden in an old mine shaft were crates of telegraph equipment, enough to establish 3 more illegal stations. Marsh was building an empire, Jake reported, spreading out a hand-drawn map. Private communication lines between here and California, all tapping into legitimate wires. Information sold to the highest bidder. The operator studied the map, understanding, finally, why Sam Torres had to die. He'd discovered not just one illegal tap, but an entire network. The forged debt papers against Maria were meant to silence her after Sam's death, to ensure she'd leave quietly. That evening, while transmitting routine messages, the operator noticed something odd in the traffic from Yuma. Marsh's transfer had been reversed. Someone with influence had intervened. A new message arrived. Marsh released. Pending further investigation. Stop. Insufficient evidence. Stop. Case under review. Stop. The machinery of justice had been compromised, wires crossed by more powerful hands. The operator felt the kind of anger that comes from watching truth be overwhelmed by influence. But then he remembered something Sam Torres had written in his journal. Truth is like electricity. It finds a way to ground itself, no matter how many insulators they use. Friday morning, unexpected allies emerged. 3 telegraph operators from other stations, men who'd noticed irregularities but hadn't known what they meant, arrived with their own evidence. They'd kept copies of suspicious messages, noted patterns of irregular transmission times, documented ghost signals that couldn't be explained by atmospheric interference. "We're a brotherhood," one explained. "When one of us is murdered, we all feel it in the wires." The operator coordinated their testimonies, creating a document that couldn't be ignored or suppressed. Each man's evidence supported the others, creating what Inspector Harrison called a net of truth that even territorial politics can't break. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Marsh himself, perhaps recognizing that his protectors had abandoned him, sent a full confession via telegraph from Yuma. The operator transcribed it with grim satisfaction. Names, dates, amounts paid, murders planned if not executed. The powerful men who'd thought themselves safe behind their money and influence found themselves exposed by the very technology they'd corrupted. Saturday's storm was different. Not electrical, but political. Telegrams flew between Washington, Phoenix, and Tucson. The territorial governor, facing federal scrutiny, ordered a complete investigation. Mining executives scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. The Southern Pacific Railway, protecting its reputation, announced comprehensive reforms. Our narrator invites us to consider how a single death can unravel empires if the right thread is pulled. Sam Torres, attempting to do his job honestly, had threatened a system of corruption so vast that his elimination seemed a small price. But his death had created something the conspirators hadn't expected. A ghost not of supernatural origin, but of documented truth that refused to stay buried. The operator worked 18-hour days that week, transmitting depositions, evidence lists, and legal documents. His fingers, dancing their familiar rhythm across the keys, were writing history in dots and dashes. Every message sent was a nail in the coffin of the conspiracy. Bradshaw, maintaining his sobriety through sheer will, proved an excellent witness. His military bearing and obvious remorse made him credible where others might have seemed self-serving. "I was a fool and a coward," he testified via telegraph to the federal prosecutor. "But these men were calculating killers." Dr. Carey, his medical expertise crucial in establishing the true cause of Sam's death, found redemption in truth-telling. His analysis of the burn patterns, supported by photographs and detailed notes, proved that Sam had been trying to disconnect the illegal splice when the lightning struck, murdered while trying to protect the integrity of the system. The storm passed by Sunday, leaving the desert washed and momentarily green. The operator stood on the station roof that evening, watching Venus rise in the clear air. Below, Copper Creek went about its business, families attending evening mass, miners heading for night shifts, the eternal rhythm of small-town life. But something fundamental had changed. Trust, once broken, heals slowly, if at all. The federal prosecutor arrived from Phoenix on a Tuesday that felt like Judgment Day. William Brennan, Irish by birth and meticulous by nature, set up his temporary court in the Copper Creek Masonic Hall, transforming that space of secret rituals into one of public revelation. The operator was called as the primary witness, his expertise in telegraphy making him the translator of technological truth for those who knew only words, not wires. "Explain to the court," Brennan said, "how you determined that the ghost messages were fraudulent." The operator demonstrated with his telegraph key, showing how each person's fist was as unique as their signature. He played recordings he'd made on the station's practice sounder, the differences clear even to untrained ears. Marcia's attempts to imitate Sam Torres were skilled but imperfect. Like forging handwriting, the basic shape might match, but the rhythm betrayed the deception. Our narrator observes how truth requires translation, especially when technology and human intent intersect. The operator had become not just witness, but interpreter, helping others understand how communication itself had been weaponized. Maria Torres testified on Wednesday, her dignity unshakable, despite Marcia's attorney's attempts to discredit her. She produced Sam's final letter, written the morning of his death, expressing his fears about what he'd discovered. "My husband knew they would try to silence him," she said. He wrote everything down, hid the papers in our baby's crib. Even after the baby died, I couldn't bring myself to move them. His protection outlasted his life. The revelation of the infant's death, previously known only to a few, shifted the room's sympathy entirely. Here was a woman who'd lost everything to Marsh's greed, yet maintained her composure with grace that shamed stronger souls. Bradshaw's testimony on Thursday was the most dramatic. Sober now for 3 weeks, he laid bare his own culpability with military precision. "I was weak, drunk, and afraid of losing my position," he admitted. "Marsh exploited that. But my weakness doesn't diminish his evil." He produced records he'd hidden, showing how Marsh had manipulated duty rosters, ensuring Sam would be alone at the ridge during the storm. The defense attorney, imported from San Francisco at considerable expense, tried to paint Marsh as an ambitious young man caught up in forces beyond his control. But the Telegraph itself contradicted him, message after message showing Marsh initiating, planning, executing the conspiracy. Dr. Carey's medical testimony on Friday provided the technical framework for murder charges. Using photographs and detailed drawings, he showed how Sam's death, while caused by lightning, had been orchestrated. Mr. Torres was attempting to disconnect illegal equipment when struck, Carey explained. His burns indicate he was holding metal pliers, not the telegraph wire itself. He was trying to stop the corruption when it killed him. That evening, the operator received an unexpected visitor. Marsh himself, released on bail, stood in the station office where everything had begun. He looked older, diminished, his confident manner replaced by something hollow. "I need you to understand," Marsh said, though the operator hadn't invited explanation. The opportunity was there, like gold lying on the ground. Everyone was doing it, selling information, making side arrangements. "Not everyone," the operator replied. "Not Sam Torres." Marsh's face contorted. "Sam was a fool." One man's honesty against an entire system? What did his principles get him except a grave? The operator considered this, then responded with careful precision. "They got him a legacy of truth. Your children, if you have them, will change their names to escape your shame. Sam's son, had he lived, would have carried his father's name with pride." The cruelty of invoking the dead child made Marsh flinch. He left without another word, but not before the operator noticed his hands trembling, not from fear, but from the palsy that sometimes afflicted telegraph operators who'd spent too many years at the key. Even his body had been marked by the instrument of his deception. Saturday brought the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Marsh would serve 15 years, not the 7 originally reported. His co-conspirators, those mining executives and railroad officials who'd thought themselves untouchable, faced their own trials. The network of corruption, once exposed, couldn't survive the desert sun of scrutiny. But justice, our narrator reflects, is rarely complete. Some guilty parties fled to Mexico or California. Others used their wealth to buy reduced sentences or comfortable imprisonments. The system that had enabled Marsh's corruption remained largely intact, wounded but not transformed. The operator found himself promoted to senior telegraph supervisor for the district, a position that came with responsibilities he hadn't sought. Inspector Harrison, impressed by his investigative work, offered him a job with the Federal Telegraph Investigation Unit. "You have the mind for it," Harrison said. "Methodical, patient, incorruptible. But the operator declined, surprising everyone, including himself. "My place is here," he said, gesturing to the familiar keys and wires. "Someone needs to maintain the integrity of these lines, to ensure the telegraph speaks truth." Old Jake understood. "Man finds gold. He doesn't always have to mine it," he observed, spitting his eternal tobacco juice. "Sometimes just knowing it's there is enough." The trial's end brought unexpected peace to Copper Creek. The Mexican community, vindicated in their pursuit of justice for Sam Torres, integrated more fully into town life. Maria Torres used the settlement money from the railroad, finally paid in full, to expand her boarding house, creating a refuge for new telegraph operators who arrived seeking honest work. Bradshaw announced his retirement, effective at year's end. "I'll return to Ohio," he said. "My sister has a farm there. Perhaps I can find redemption in growing things instead of managing them." His sobriety had held throughout the trial, a testament to the power of purpose over weakness. The operator spent his evenings that week at his telescope, finding solace in celestial mechanics after so much human complexity. Jupiter was particularly clear, its moons dancing their ancient pattern. He thought of Sam Torres, who'd loved the stars too, who'd understood that some things remained constant despite human treachery. Sunday morning brought one final revelation. Cleaning out Marsh's abandoned quarters, the operator found a journal, hidden beneath loose floorboards. In it, Marsh had documented everything, not from guilt, but from pride, recording his cleverness for posterity. The final entry, dated the night before Sam's death, read, "Tomorrow, the problem of Torres resolves itself. Nature, properly directed, is the perfect accomplice." 3 months had passed since the trial's conclusion, and December brought an unusual cold to the Arizona desert. The operator, now senior supervisor for the district, stood at his familiar post, though his duties had expanded beyond simple message transmission. Ice formed on the telegraph wires at night, creating natural chimes when the wind stirred them. Nature's own Morse code, speaking of winter and change. Our narrator observes how time transforms even the most dramatic events into history, then into legend, finally into the subtle coloring of everyday life. Copper Creek had absorbed its tragedy and scandal, metabolizing them into something that strengthened rather than poisoned the community's body. The morning brought routine traffic, commodity prices, train schedules, personal messages for the holidays approaching. But between official transmissions, the operator found himself teaching. 3 young men had arrived from the Southern Pacific's new training program, eager to learn not just the technical skills, but the ethics of the telegraph. Sam Torres's death had prompted reforms throughout the system. The telegraph, he told them, is democracy made electric. Every message, whether from a mine owner or a Mexican laborer, travels the same wires at the same speed. Your job is to maintain that equality. Young Matthews, barely 18 and fresh from Pennsylvania, asked, "But what about private messages? Confidential business?" "Privacy is not the same as conspiracy," the operator replied. "We protect the former and expose the latter. The difference will become clear with experience." Maria Torres visited that afternoon, bringing her usual December gift of tamales for the station crew. She'd remarried to the school teacher from Tucson who'd helped her navigate the legal aftermath of Sam's death. Her boarding house had become the unofficial center for the town's growing Mexican middle class, prosperity built on tragedy's settlement. "I wanted you to know," she said quietly, "we're naming the new baby Samuel, not for grief, but for remembrance." The operator understood. Memory, properly tended, became not burden, but foundation. Bradshaw's replacement had arrived the previous month, a younger man named Foster, who'd lost an arm in the Philippines, but whose remaining hand could send 25 words per minute. He brought military efficiency without Bradshaw's haunted authority, treating the station as logistics rather than kingdom. "Bradshaw writes from Ohio," Foster mentioned that evening. "Says he's growing corn and staying sober. Wants to know if we've had any more ghost messages." There had been none. The wires sang only their intended songs now, though sometimes during storms the operator heard echoes of that strange August when the dead had seemed to speak. He knew now it had been Marsh's manipulation, but knowledge didn't entirely erase the mystery. Some experiences leave marks that facts can't fully heal. Dr. Carey had found his own redemption, opening a free clinic for the Mexican and Chinese communities. His struggle with laudanum had become manageable, controlled by purpose rather than controlling him. Medicine and telegraphy aren't so different, he'd told the operator. Both involve reading signals, interpreting symptoms, transmitting remedies across distance. Old Jake still prospected, still searched for gold that might not exist. But he'd also become the station's unofficial historian, regaling the young operators with tales of the territory's evolution. This land's seen Spanish conquistadors, Apache warriors, Mexican ranchers, and American settlers, he'd say. The telegraph just added another layer to an already complex story. The operator's evening observations had become more sophisticated. He'd ordered a better telescope from San Francisco, paid for with his supervisor's salary. Venus was particularly bright this December, what the Mexicans called Estrella de la Tarde, the evening star. He had begun corresponding with an astronomer at Harvard, their exchanges creating another kind of network across the vast American distances. But it was a message received that very evening that provided the story's final note. From Yuma Territorial Prison came word that Theodore Marsh had died, not dramatically, but pathetically, from dysentery that the prison doctor couldn't control. He'd spent his final days, the warden reported, tapping on his cell walls in Morse code, sending messages no one could receive. The operator transcribed this information without satisfaction or sorrow. Marsh had been ambitious, intelligent, capable of great things. But he'd chosen to corrupt rather than create, to exploit rather than build. The telegraph, that great democratic instrument, had become in his hands a tool of deception and death. Foster asked, "Should we notify the newspapers?" "Send it as routine death notice," the operator replied. "No more, no less. Let him have in death the equality he denied others in life." That night, unable to sleep, the operator climbed to the roof one final time. The desert stretched endlessly under starlight, that same vastness that had intimidated him 8 years ago when he'd first arrived from Ohio. Now, it seemed not empty, but full of possibility, of connection, of the countless messages that traveled through darkness to bring light. He thought of Sam Torres, whose death had exposed such corruption, of Bradshaw, finding peace in Ohio soil. Of Marsh dying alone in prison, tapping messages into stone. Of Maria building new life on the foundation of old grief. Each had sent their messages into the world, some true, some false, all part of the human conversation that the telegraph enabled. The wires hummed in the night wind, their vibration almost musical. Sometimes, if he listened carefully, the operator could distinguish different lines. The main trunk to Phoenix, the spur to the mines, the new connection to the Mexican settlements. Each carried its own frequency, its own note in the desert's electric symphony. A new message arrived just after midnight, requiring transcription. It was from a young woman in Missouri to her brother in the mines. Father died Tuesday, stop. Peacefully, stop. Said to tell you he was proud, stop. Come home if you can, stop. The operator sent it forward, one more human truth traveling at the speed of electricity through the darkness. Our narrator concludes by observing this man at his key, no longer young, but not yet old, his fingers steady on the brass lever that connected distant souls. He'd solved a mystery, exposed a murder, helped deliver justice. But these dramatic events had become simply part of his story, no more or less important than the thousands of routine messages he'd sent before and would send after. The telegraph never lies, he'd said during the trial. But perhaps that wasn't quite true. The telegraph, like any human tool, reflected the truth or falsity of those who used it. What mattered was maintaining its integrity, protecting its democratic promise, ensuring that all voices could speak across the vastness. Below in the station, one of the young operators was practicing, the clicking of his uncertain attempts echoing through the night. Tomorrow, the operator would correct his rhythm, teach him the proper pressure, help him develop his own distinctive fist. The conversation would continue, the wires would sing, and somewhere in the darkness, perhaps, understanding would travel at the speed of light between souls separated by distance, but connected by hope. The desert held its own council, ancient and patient. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns, and in the little station at Copper Creek, the telegraph keys waited for dawn and the messages that would surely come. Each one a small victory over isolation, a tiny bridge across the vast American silence.